It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Philips 328P6VUBREB. This monitor has an OSD that's controlled by touch-sensitive buttons towards the bottom of the monitor, the bottom right. You can actually activate these either from the labelled area at the front face, or you can activate them from the bottom area. They're actually very sensitive, and they're actually too sensitive, and I think my particular unit has a bit of an issue. The second button along there, the down arrow, multi-view/down arrow, is too sensitive. So this is going to make the video a little bit difficult, and I'm probably going to have to sort of skip through some of the bits or sort of go back, and it'll be a little bit annoying, but just bear with me. And it's not really the best OSD control system. I much prefer a joystick, or if needs be, just normal pressable buttons to the touch-sensitive malarkey used here. The power LED, you can see it there. It glows white, sort of a very small power LED, not quite a pinprick design, a little bit bigger than that, but nothing massive. And that's front-facing. It glows white when the monitor's on and blinks white when the monitor's on standby. If you activate the first button, it gives you the smart image presets. So there's a list of presets here. I don't particularly like most of these. Easy read seems to make everything black and white, and I believe it locks the brightness as well. No, it doesn't lock the brightness, but it does set it to a very high brightness by default. So if you like to read things in black and white, by all means use this, but I don't really find it easier to read things with this, so it's not really very appropriately named in my view. Next is Office, and this is fairly reasonable, but basically a lot of these are quite reasonable, but they don't really offer any clear advantages. You can make manual adjustments and you get more flexibility just having this set to off. There's also a game mode, but that doesn't really do anything special either. It doesn't change the input lag or anything like that. There's economy, and that just sort of sets it to a low brightness by default. Low blue mode, and that is useful. That's low blue light settings. You can change this to 4 different levels, with 4 being the most effective, and I explore that a bit in the review. There is smart uniformity, and that also has its uses, and again that's explored in the review. It's a digital uniformity compensation mode, but off gives you the highest level of flexibility. There are plenty of options to mess around with in the OSD, which I'll come on to shortly. Multi-view, this is the picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture functionality of the monitor. It supports 2 different inputs at the same time. I'm not going to go through this because I've only got one source connected to the monitor. But you can essentially have it so you've got your second source in a little window wherever you want it to be displayed, and that can be a window sort of in the top right or bottom right or wherever you want it. Or you can have it side by side, both sources on the screen at the same time, filling the screen space. The third button along, if you press that, it's actually a custom key. So I've got it so you can adjust the brightness quickly, but you can set that to a few other things, and I'll come on to that when I look at the main menu system. Go on to the main menu system. The first bit is low blue mode, so you can activate those low blue settings I was talking about. There are 4 different settings with varying effectiveness, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Next there is input, so you can select the input used by the monitor. There are 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, DisplayPort 1.4 and USB Type-C. There's picture, and that allows you to choose the HDR setting used by the monitor. If you're actually running HDR, the monitor goes into its HDR mode and it'll use whichever setting you're using here. If you're using the monitor in SDR, as I am now, then you've got your full range of OSD options, and it doesn't actually have the HDR mode active, but this is just for when you're running HDR. And I'll show you the settings which are used and actually available under HDR at the end of the video. There's picture format, and you can select widescreen 4:3 or 1:1, so that's used for displaying non-native resolutions essentially. So there's a 1:1 pixel mapping feature, which will give you a black border around the screen and just use the pixels called for in the source resolution, so you don't get any sort of distortion. Whereas for widescreen, an interpolation process is used, a scaling process to fill up all of the pixels on the screen. Next, there's brightness. Pretty self-explanatory, allows you to change the brightness of the backlight. Then there's contrast, sharpness, and sharpness you change in increments of 10, so there's a bit of flexibility there. Various smart response settings which are explored in the review. Off, fast, faster and fastest. I consider fast to be optimal. Smart contrast, and that's a dynamic contrast feature of the monitor. You can turn that on or off, again explored in the written review. Various gamma settings. 2.2 is the default. There's 1.8, 2.0, 2.2, 2.4 and 2.6. There's a pixel orbiting feature, and this just displaces all of the pixels or the image by 1 pixel to the left and then straight back to the right or straight back to the center. It just does this periodically. I haven't noticed it actually doing it, so I assume it's doing it. It just is a very brief judder, and it's designed to reduce image retention. I didn't have any issues with image retention on this monitor, but pixel orbiting is a feature to try to reduce that as much as possible, and it's something which quite a lot of Philips monitors just have on as a feature. Overscan, only relevant to older systems, perhaps old games consoles, not relevant to the kind of systems you're likely to be using this monitor with, kind of a legacy feature if you like. There's PIP, P/P, picture-in-picture, picture-by-picture, which I've already gone through, and you can see there are a few other options here. So you can select the input used, the size of the picture-in-picture section. There's a PIP position, so you can, as I was explaining before, you can change where on the screen the picture is in the picture, or you can swap the input sources. Audio, so the monitor has fairly powerful, quite reasonable integrated speakers. They're not amazing, but as far as integrated speakers on monitors go, they're pretty decent. You can change the volume of them or mute them, and this controls things connected to the 3.5mm jack if you've got something connected instead, rather than wanting to use the speakers of the monitor. Next there is colour, which I'll try and get onto. As I say, it's very difficult because of the oversensitive controls to do this precisely. So you can set this to user define, red, green and blue colour channels independently controlled there. There's an sRGB emulation setting, and that's explored in the review. Colour temperature setting, 5000K. I actually use this myself rather than the low blue mode. This is essentially a low blue light setting, and it's very effective. But the difference is that the low blue modes have a bit of an overriding green tint, and that's because they don't lower the green channel as much. And that's good in terms of retaining contrast as much as possible, but contrast remains quite decent with the colour temperature 5000K setting, and I just prefer it because I don't like that green tint very much, and I prefer not having it if I have the choice. So I use this for my own viewing comfort later on in the evening when I want to reduce the blue light exposure. Next there's language, so you can control the language that the OSD is displayed in, and there are OSD settings, so you can change the horizontal and vertical position of the OSD on the screen. You can change the transparency effect, so it's set to off by default, but if you prefer you can have the OSD set to various levels of transparency. OSD timeout, so that's how long after the last button press before the OSD will automatically disappear. So I've got that set to 60 seconds just for the sake of the video. You can have it set to 30, 20, 10 or 5 if you prefer. You can manually exit the OSD at any time by just pressing the sort of first button, the back button, a few times. The user key, and that's what I mentioned before, and I had that set to brightness. By default, it is set to input, or you can have it control the volume. So there's not a great amount of flexibility in terms of what you can assign the user key to. I would have preferred to have it so you can have it set to one of the sort of color temperature settings perhaps, or something like that, because I like to activate that in the night and deactivate it at other times, but it's at least being able to change the brightness is more useful for me than changing the input, I suppose. And then the final menu, Setup, there's a resolution notification, and this just puts a little message on the screen telling you you're not using the native resolution of the screen, and you should be for optimal performance and optimal image quality. You can change the USB mode used by the monitor. It's set to USB 2 by default for compatibility. You can set that to USB 3. I don't have any USB things connected to the monitor, so it doesn't matter that I've got it set to USB 2. But of course, if I did, I would just set that to USB 3 if I intended to use that. USB standby mode. This allows the USB ports to be active if the monitor itself is switched off, and by switched off I mean still technically on standby, but if you've sort of switched it off by using the power button, then the USB ports can remain active. If you have this set to on, and if you have it set to off, it uses a little bit less power. This doesn't ever use a massive amount of power, but the USB ports are kind of slight leeches of power. So if you're not using them and you've got USB standby mode set to on, you will have a small amount of extra power drain from the monitor. That's all that is. There is an option to reset everything to the factory defaults, and there is an information section, and this just includes the model number, serial number, and the refresh rate and resolution used by the screen. A quick and hasty addition to the video: I've now got HDR active and I've got my tripod away, which is why this video is going to be a little bit shaky for this section, but this is very quick, just to show you the settings which are available when you've got HDR active. The low blue mode you can't activate. You can change the input, of course, but most of the options are greyed out. And that's because HDR carefully controls the image of the monitor. It's close coordination between the GPU, the game, and the monitor, so it's not really intended that you are manually adjusting various settings. It's all carefully controlled and coordinated, and that's why you can't control most of this stuff. You can't change the colours, for example. You can't manually adjust the brightness, although there are two HDR settings, and one's less bright than the other and a lot less impressive than the other. So the normal setting is less bright. The VESA HDR 600 setting uses the full HDR capabilities of the monitor, but you can't just manually adjust the brightness or anything like that. So that's all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system with really annoying controls on the Philips 328P6VUBREB. Be sure to check out the full review on pcmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.